If you're learning Spanish and hoping to achieve solid conversational fluency, you'll almost certainly encounter the intermediate plateau. In language learning, there are many opportunities for getting stuck or feeling like you're hitting a wall, but the most common place to get stuck is soon after you've mastered the basics of the language. That's because this is when everything changes. When you were a beginner, you saw quick results with every new word, and more core elements of the language became clear day after day. It's really fun to master the most important 200 or 300 words of the language and start forming sentences with them. But once you're beyond that, you're suddenly confronted with the overwhelming gap between this basic mastery and true fluency. Now there are thousands and thousands of words and phrases to learn with diminishing returns, which is why it feels like instead of moving upward quickly, you're now on an endless plateau. I'm Timothy from Accelerated Spanish, a learning system that specializes in helping English speakers learn to speak deeply and personally with their Spanish-speaking loved ones. And in these 3 short videos, I'll share our most important tactics for hacking the intermediate plateau so that you not only make consistent progress every day, but you can actually see and feel the progress that you're making toward mastery of the Spanish language. Now, these particular videos assume that you've already basically mastered all the fundamentals of the Spanish language, particularly when it comes to essential grammar. For example, you can now use all the pronouns flawlessly, you're adept at all the tenses and moods of the most common Spanish verbs, and even if your vocabulary is pretty limited right now, you have an easy time creating idiomatic, natural Spanish sentences with what you do know. If you aren't at that point yet, you should focus on getting there before finishing this video, so check out the second link in the description of this video for mastering the foundational elements of the Spanish language. But if you are at that intermediate place now, most likely your biggest fear is that no matter how much you study, Spanish isn't ever going to flow naturally in conversation. You want to be sure that all the time and effort that you've been putting in will transfer into fluid conversational skills. So let's bridge that gap by talking about the 2 most important priorities when you're in an intermediate place. The first priority is to establish a strong pattern of consistent daily growth. When you know that you're getting better every single day, you'll never completely lose confidence or faith in your abilities. This priority is basically summed up as momentum, the knowledge that you're improving consistently, and the motivation that it gives you to keep going every day. The second priority is speaking as much as possible. This is absolutely critical at this point because you can't simply jump from studying Spanish to speaking conversationally. Imagine yourself in a conversation with a native speaker, and imagine that as soon as you have a thought, you're able to utter that thought out loud in Spanish. That takes an enormous amount of confidence, and if you're like most people, you first need to be in the habit of speaking Spanish unhesitatingly for several months before you're at that point. So the priority of speaking out loud as much as possible is crucial for bridging the gap between merely studying Spanish and actually using Spanish unhesitatingly in conversation. The reason that these are our 2 priorities is that with them together, you can create a snowball effect of both knowledge and confidence. This actually creates a feedback loop that builds on itself beautifully. The more knowledge you gain day by day, the more confident you'll be in speaking Spanish out loud spontaneously. And the more that happens, the more motivated you'll be to keep learning more Spanish. If you can get both parts moving consistently, this is the holy grail of learning. The more you learn, the more motivated you are to keep learning. But these 2 priorities won't simply fulfill themselves. In order to make them happen, there are 5 habits that you need to establish in your life. 5 habits may sound like a lot of changes to make to your life at once, but fortunately, each of these habits is fairly easy to implement one at a time. Each one builds on the previous one. So if you just start with habit number 1, you'll have an easy time establishing habit number 2, and then habit number 3, and so on. In the next video, we'll cover habit number 1 in depth. This is the essential foundation for constant Spanish growth. Meanwhile, make sure to internalize these 2 priorities, establishing a pattern of consistent daily growth and speaking as much as possible. That'll already get you a long way. Also, subscribe to this channel for more tips on achieving core foundational mastery of the Spanish language and on working from there to full fluency.